welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers from across the literary spectrum about their work and how they do what they do. From huge New York Times bestsellers, maybe to folks just getting their work out there for the first time. The Open Mic is about and for writers and the experience of writing and working our way through the publishing industry here in this modern age, which is not an easy task for anybody. I don't care where you are on the spectrum. For those who don't know, the show is available by the same name, the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, on both my YouTube channel and via all of the major podcast platforms. So if you have a preference for one or the other, that's great. But either way, you should sign up so you don't ever miss any great content. Because believe me, you won't be just hearing me. You get a lot of really smart people like my guest today, because I am joined by author and publisher Sarah Faxon, whose latest dark fantasy novel, The Blue Dragon Society Origins, is now out to some very nice reviews. Sarah, welcome to the Open Mic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. Pleasure's all mine. Well, as I noted, you have a new book out, and why don't you tell us a little bit about Blue Dragon Society?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the Blue Dragon Society Origins is the first leg in this series. I'm anticipating about 5 titles with it so far. And this book has been with me, or the series has been with me for about 20 plus years. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And Origins is a coming of age story, if you really boil it down. It's about a young shape-shifting dragon whose society has a challenge that they have to do, or a mission that they have to do, to come down to the mortal world to help mortals in some way. And his challenge is to try to chase away, or to find out more about these strange new creatures who are vampires that all the world is talking about and that is plaguing the societies. But the main character, Owen, hates mortals because he believes they are responsible for his mother's death. So he has this very interesting challenge that he has to face of, well, do I help these people who I'm pretty sure did my mother in, or do I turn my back on my society? And as he goes along, he's a very angsty character in the beginning. He's a teenager. He's a late teenager who's just lost his mother and is dealing with a lot of quote unquote real world situations where he's not sure if he wants to be a part of the society. And he questions them. And even though they come across as doing everything good and for the greater good, Owen starts to realize as he goes along, maybe the greater good isn't always the best thing. So it looks at society as a whole and not just his society. It brings up questions that I would want teens to ask and to think about in their own cultures, in their own microorganism worlds that they exist in, to see how they fit in their society and in their neighborhoods, and if that's where they want to be. And so we're going to see a lot more in the next few books about what actually happened to his mother, because that's kind of open-ended in the first one. So there's a bit of a mystery that we're going to uncover. And of course, there's demons, there's vampires, it's high fantasy, and it's just a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. All right. I did want to confirm though too. Are these intended to be YA or young adult, or is it a more general audience that you're trying to reach with these books?
That's an excellent question. So the first 2 are going to be more YA, and the series is going to grow up as it goes along. So it is the first one is written to be read by 13 up. But as we go along, as the characters sort of age, the books are going to age with them. So as we get into the next one, it's going to get a little bit more intense in terms of the situations they're facing, and then so on and so on. They are going to become adult by the end.
I find that fascinating, that the timeline in books. Some of my very favorite, I read a lot of crime fiction, a lot of mystery. Some of my very favorite ones, the Walter Mosley's Z.Z. Rollins series, Tony Hillerman's Navajo Tribal Police series. I'm sure there's a lot more that come up, if I thought about it a little bit more. I don't know that I see it that much in fantasy. Maybe I admittedly don't read a ton of it the way I read these other things, but I've always been fascinated by authors who can do that, who can grow characters uh, chronologically through their aging and how they change. It seems like kind of a big challenge. What are your thoughts on, as you develop characters? And I'm thinking of other, people who might be watching this going, well, I've had that same idea, but maybe I'm a little afraid to take that on. What are your thoughts on how you evolve characters over the course of time like that?
So I was inspired to do that. And that wasn't originally a part of my vision for this series at all. In fact, Origins wasn't a part of my vision. This came about fairly last minute, sometime last summer. My business partner Teresa and I were talking about the incredible shape-shifting phase that was happening in the reading world. Every other book had some kind of shapeshifter romance, and they were getting more and more extreme. I have a blue werewolf alien cover that I saved because it's just fantastic. It's just, I couldn't let that go. And so we were talking about this, and she's like, "What's next? Shape-shifting dragons?" And that for me was just the spark for this. And I'd also always wanted to write a book for my niece and nephew, something that they could enjoy. They're teenagers. And my writing tends to be a bit more adult in terms of the content and the situations that the characters go through. But I wanted something for them. And Origins was the story. And it is dark fantasy, so it deals with much darker themes. It has horror aspects to it. So it is definitely not a fairy tales type happy ending story. So it already has that slightly more mature edge about it. And so I started off with Owen as a teenager, and he grows up a lot. So the situations in the story help him to grow up and mature dramatically. And he realizes the world isn't about him and his universe that he has created for himself, and that there's much more to it. So he goes through that growth in the first book. And then in the second one, it's going to continue to evolve. And then in the next story, it's going to be a completely different main character. And she's going to be basically the next step up for that age. So he's going to transition from late teens to teens, early 20s, and then she's going to be early mid 20s. So having characters grow up literally in that sense is one way to do it. And the Harry Potter series, I think, did this very, very well, of literally having the main character grow up and age with it, with each book a new year at school, which is a really great way to do it. But just to have moments where your character matures, whether it's from having their first kiss at prom to, growing up and getting married or whatever it is, you can age your character like you would, like we do, and have moments or inciting incidents that inspire them to mature in some way or the other.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm about halfway through, and I'm really enjoying. That you have a lot of different characters, and they're at various stages, and I like that. Yes, because young ones tend to be full of themselves.
Yes.
We know that. I often wish now, I could go back to those times when I had all the answers, because now all I have is questions the older I get. You focus on dark fantasy and speculative fiction. And, for anyone who might not be familiar with the terminology that we're talking about here, how do you define speculative fiction?
So the easiest way to think of speculative fiction is what if. You ask the question of what if? What if a coffee cup fell over in a cafe because a wizard across the other side told it to? And it typically is an umbrella for sci-fi, dystopian, fantasy, and there's a couple others, sometimes horror as well.
Yeah.
But what it really does is it questions bigger topics that we can relate to. So class, race, gender issues, things that even though we're reading this book as an escape or writing it as an escape, we can identify with in a modern context. Hunger Games is a great example. Anything Margaret Atwood does is a great example. Handmaid's Tale. So those very dystopian stories where they ask, well, what if this happened? And that put us in this direction. And so even my stories, which take place in a high fantasy world, it's technically our world. It is Earth as we know it, but something happened. That was my what if that took us on a very different path. And that actually destroyed the geological makeup of the world. So that's what speculative fiction is it's what if something happened, and goes a little bit beyond romance and a bit beyond our true crime stories or our modern or historical fiction actually can also be kind of within spec fic. But it's just a fun genre, and it explores these major topics and themes that we confront daily.
Most authors have far more story ideas than they are ever going to have the time to pursue. How do you call out your story ideas? Is there a process that you use to say, okay, good idea, wrong time, what have you? How do you go about making your time get focused on one particular project over the many that you could probably pursue at any given time?
I ask myself this question daily. As an author, I have ADD, which I think is very common for us out there. and indeed, we do story hop a lot. I typically work on about 3 projects at a time. And the reason I do that is because I'll be going really hard in Origins, really hard, really great. It's my whole world, it's my focus. But then I'll hit a little bit of a bump. I don't want to say a wall, but I'll hit a little bit of a bump. And I need to take a step back from it to think about something else to clear my mind. So then I'll work on this project over here. And then Bloodlords through Kindle Vella right now is my other big focus. I'll be working on it, and then I'll hit that hump again. So having those other projects helps to keep my writing skills toned. I have to write every single day, even if it's 200 words, it's something to keep my writing skills sharpened, and having those multiple projects up kind of helped me to do that. But to get to more of your bigger point of how do I decide, which one should I be working on now? It's a challenge, but with my world that I'm creating in my high fantasy world, I have a specific way I'm introducing it. So it is high fantasy, and I want it to be as believable as high fantasy can be. And in one of the ways I'm doing that is bringing characters who are disconnected from the main world and introducing them to it so they are learning, and we, the readers, writers, are learning through their eyes. So that's one of the ways I'm kind of developing that world, because as we go along, it's going to get deeper and deeper into different religions and different cultures that exist in this world. And I'm trying to introduce it slowly but surely. But there is one book that I have totally written. It is edited. I could technically, if I so chose, I'm going to want to do another read through, but I could throw it out into the world. It is ready to go. And it has been, but I haven't, because it was my therapy book for 2020. And it talked about being in quarantine and being in shutdown. And while it wasn't specifically about coronavirus, it was about a virus that had taken over San Diego, and people had to shut their doors and go into quarantine. And so it felt too real to publish just yet.
Right.
And I do intend to. I absolutely intend to put it out there, but it's just been shelved from right now. And another reason, aside from it being too real at the moment, is I'm trying to build my brand as a fantasy author. And that one is contemporary and has paranormal elements to it. And that's right in line with my horror brand that I do, but it's too much of a stretch just yet. So I want to get a firm footing within my genre first, really get established there, and then branch out more.
It's a good point, and I really should have planned to ask you this anyway, but since you brought it up, I'm going to follow that thread a little bit, because I talk to a lot of writers who write in different genres, and it used to be if you were going to do that, you had to use a pen name.
Mm-hmm.
If in whatever you had established yourself in was your brand, and if you were going to write in another genre, you probably would want to use a pen name or something along those lines. That was pretty common. We don't see that as much anymore. Now, writers feel a lot more comfortable writing in their own name across multiple genres. But maybe the ticket is, as you're noting, when you feel pretty established in one, that you have that leeway. Am I interpreting that correctly as to how you're viewing it?
Yes, exactly. And so I'm kind of making branches out toward my exterior genres, if you will. So like with Bloodlords, it's an urban fantasy story, and it's high urban fantasy. There's vampires, there's witches, there's werewolves, which is still very much connected to my fantasy branding. So yes, getting myself very established there. And then once I have a good following, be like, hey, I also write this, because it is hard to brand yourself across multiple genres. And that's actually something I help to guide other authors in doing, which is creating their brand. How do you do that? How do you establish who you are as an author? Because you can be a totally different person at home, but establishing your author face and the things associated with you. And so with somebody like me who's cross-genre, which, like you were saying, we are seeing more and more of, I think one of the things that's making it easier is because we're on social media all the time. So we're showing ourselves at home with our cat, with our favorite cafe, and we're showing ourselves as more of a rounded person. So I think it's becoming easier for us to come off as rounded authors as well.
You know, branding has become everything. It really has become everything as things have changed. You refer to yourself as a creative warrior, and that's one of the great branding monikers I've heard. So please tell me a little bit more about that moniker, the creative warrior moniker. What does that mean? You know, how do you pursue that?
Yeah, so that came about during a podcast interview. I was interviewing Cornelia Fay, who's a local author here in San Diego, another publisher as well, at Constellation Press. And during our interview, she was thanking me for interviewing her. And she said, "You're my favorite creative warrior." And actually, it also goes beyond that too. There was another author, Cheryl, whose name I'm forgetting right now, who'd also called me a creative warrior. That's where it started. And then it stuck with Cornelia. And so I was given this moniker because I'm an artist. I love doing plant arrangements, and now I'm into aquariums and terrariums and the art of those. And on top of that, I write novels. And on top of that, I do all sorts of creative aspects. And I'm often asked if I sleep, and I'm like, no, I just push on through. Like, I'm fine. I do sleep, for the record, I sleep. But I'm constantly creating and I cannot be still. And so Cheryl told me that I was a creative warrior because it is my mission in this world. It is why I'm here. And it's what I love, and it's what I would fight for.
I can see a really great logo coming out of that in some way or another. There has to be like I say, a logo of some kind that comes out of that name.
I can work on that. Yeah, that's good.
You know, you mentioned that you work with the authors as well, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the publishing here in just a moment. But one of the things that a lot of newer writers are told is that they really need to become part of a writers group, a writers critique group in particular. I find those can be really helpful. Really, they can be a mixed bag, is what the bottom line is. They can be really helpful if it's a good one, but if it's not a good one, it can actually be counterproductive. So when you talk to writers, what kind of advice do you give them about becoming involved in a writers group?
I recommend people to shop around, to kind of sit in on a couple of them before they commit to anything, and to find one that is supportive to them. And by supportive, I don't just mean being like, oh, this was the best book I've ever read. This was awesome. No, by supportive, I mean providing constructive, respectful criticism. And I throw respectful, in there because I've seen some fantastic criticism. Well, it's not fantastic. Some very hearty criticism that is a little too aggressive. So using words like "you should," "why would you do this?" Harsher criticisms don't help us. We are authors. We tend to be a bit more sensitive. And it doesn't take much to push us over into the, oh, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm an imposter. Imposter syndrome is a huge issue within our community and within any artist community, really. So I recommend people find places that give supportive, honest feedback that says, well, maybe consider this way, or whatever works for you, where you feel like, wow, I actually learned something from this. I'm going to grow as an author from this, where you can talk out your character's issues, or, you know what, should this main villain be like this? Or if you can have those honest, open discussions, that is fantastic. And to look for a group that you look forward to being a part of, as opposed to, oh God, like I've got 10,000 words I have to edit for this group. I don't know, I don't want to do that. Work is important. Doing the work is important. But if you're excited to be in a group, if you're excited for the feedback and the camaraderie that's going to happen, that's when you know you're in the right group.
Well, and that's really good advice, not just for joining a critique group to, as someone to get critique, but also that's good advice for how to be a good member of the group in critiquing others. I've had authors tell me that they were almost persuaded to drop everything because of overly harsh criticism from somebody who they thought, who they viewed as being very successful, and so it almost crushed them at the embryonic stage, because they felt like, oh well, this person's successful and they're telling me my work is crap, and so it must be crap, and blah blah blah. So yeah. I mean, it's a two-way street. So I'm glad you mentioned that. As I noted, I had your fellow writer and your publishing partner, Teresa Halverson, on the show a little while back, and we talked about some of the pros and cons of independent and hybrid publishing. Is there one thing that you tell authors when they come to you? And I should mention, it's No Bad Books Press, so I'm sorry, I should have brought that up right in the beginning. When they're considering the possibility of coming, taking one of these routes, either hybrid or fully independent, do you what kinds of things do you tell them? And do you find most writers these days are really aware of the full breadth of options that are available to them?
It's an amazing question, because I still think I'm learning the amount of services that are available to us as authors if we wanted to pursue the independent route. And, 10 years ago, it was a totally different world. And to do anything independent was $10,000 or more. I mean, it was incredible how much it would cost to do the hybrid or indie route. So to kind of define the differences, so independent, fully independent, and I think they are both independent, but fully independent means you are doing it all. You are hiring somebody to do your formatting, or you're figuring it out for yourself. You are hiring an editor. Please don't edit your work by yourself. That is one of my biggest things. We are human. We miss things. It's okay. Have another set of eyes to look over your work. Editing services, I highly recommend, don't skip. Those are all things that you can outsource or choose to do yourself. But if you do choose to do it yourself, it takes time to learn how to do these things to the quality of work that you are seeking. And what I mean by that is, at No Bad Books Press, we're a member of the Independent Book Publishers Association, the IBPA, which has fantastic resources to help elevate the standards of independent authors, of small presses, of hybrid presses. So there's this standard that we're all trying to reach for, so that we are competing with the traditionals, the Penguins, the Random Houses. We are now at a standard to where you could go to Barnes and Noble and you'd probably have a hard time telling the difference between a small press and a traditional publication, which is fantastic. I mean, the industry has grown so much, and it has become so much more accessible that you could YouTube pretty much anything on how to do formatting, how to use Ingram Spark to upload and distribute your works. It's amazing how much more accessible this all is. But what it really boils down to is, do you have the time to do it? If you do, oh my gosh, all the power in the world to you, because it is a fantastic experience. It is so wonderful being able to make your own changes to your work. If they're your cover, you're finding your cover art's not working, you can re-upload a new cover. You have that power to do it, and you don't have to go through your publisher to do so. Now, for the hybrid or author services presses, we've actually changed our vibe, and we're actually in the process of doing that. We considered ourselves a hybrid press. And so what that means is people will come to us and ask us if we would like to put their book together for services. So we have a service fee for the various elements that we do. So that's cover design, formatting, editing. But we do things a little differently, where we also vet the works, because we have a particular standard that we are trying to keep, and we want to keep the works that we publish within our brand. So we're the speculative fiction and prefer more fantasy sci-fi elements than not. So we also
you don't take just anybody. You're looking for a particular thing.
Right. We are very particular. We're also looking for authors that we can work with, which sounds kind of awful at first, but we want to ensure that they want to work with us as much as we want to work with them, because it's a partnership. And we want to ensure that we are openly communicating back and forth, and that it's as good of an experience as possible for our authors. It tends to be, sometimes hybrid presses are considered vanity presses because, oh, they'll just publish anything for a price. That's one of the conceptions that's out there. And of course, there is a time and a place for that, because if I decide I want to write my memoir, I really don't care who buys it or not. I just want to put my memoir up there on the shelf. Yeah, I'm going to pay for that, because I don't want to have to deal with the time for that or to worry about it. Do I think a traditional press would publish it? No. My life's not that interesting. So, I mean, it is, but to me, it is to me, but it wouldn't necessarily be to traditional publications. So these are sort of the things you want to think about is, what are my goals? What do I want this book? What do I want it to be? What do I want to get back from it? If you just want a book on the family dining room table, or on your coffee table rather, that is a beautiful goal. But that is very different from, I want to be the New York Times bestseller. So figuring out what your goals are will kind of help you to determine what route you want to take. If you want to pursue traditional, if you want to do the independent or the hybrid route, the author services route like we are, that's how you kind of figure out, what is my goal? What time do I have to pursue it? And what is my bandwidth to learn new things? Because there is a lot to be learned out there. And honestly, if it wasn't for the quarantine of 2020, I don't know that Teresa and I would have had the time or the bandwidth to have learned as much as we have.
Well, I really appreciate hearing you say that, because, because of doing this, I get asked a lot by people who are thinking about writing. Oh, everyone's like, oh, well, I've been thinking about writing a book, and what about this? And that's the exact thing now that I tell people is, well, the number one question you have to answer is, what do I want out of this?
Mm-hmm.
If you will not be satisfied with anything other than being on the New York Times bestsellers list with a book published by Random House, great, fabulous. That's very different than all of the other options that are less than that, right? Or different than that, however you want to look at it. But only you know what you will be satisfied with. And if you won't be satisfied with anything else than that, well, okay, buckle up. It's going to be a process, right? There's a lot of other ways you can go. So I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I think it's the kind of thing we all should be telling people when they say, I think I want to write a book. Okay. And all that said, you noted No Bad Books Press is not a vanity press, and there is a query process that you use, right?
Yes.
Tell me more about the query process that you use.
So what we do is we have authors submit their works to us, and we do, I think, first 50 pages or 20,000 words, somewhere in there. And we want to get a feel for the story. We'll ask for a synopsis to make sure that it's a whole story, not just the first 50 pages. You'd be surprised. And so we want to vet the works. We want to ensure that it's something that both of us, because there's only two of us currently, are interested in, because this is a commitment. We are investing our time into this, and we want to make sure it's something that we are excited about and that we want to pursue, and that again fits within the branding of our imprint. And so that's sort of phase one. Phase two is we meet with the author. We are very transparent with our prices for the author services that we provide, what it all entails, and a timeline, which is another big thing too, because we want to invest a good amount of time into these books. We don't want to rush them. We don't want them to be on the shelf for 2 years either. So we look at up to an 18-month turnaround time. But that depends on the author as well. If they're like, you know what, could we do 9 months? Depends on the word count, depends on the amount of work that goes into it. And after we've read the full manuscript, that's when we're able to have that very honest conversation with our authors. And we have a full Zoom meeting. We will go back and forth via email, but we want to talk to our people. We think that that is extremely important. We are authors. We get it. We know what it's like to be waiting. So we want to ensure that we give time to our authors so that they can ask us questions in person. We are available to them via email and however else as well, and phone, because this is a business partner relationship. And we really believe in setting up our authors for the best success, because we've waited months on end for rejections or acceptances. We know what that's like, and it's awful. So we definitely want to be there as much as possible for our authors, and being transparent with them as well. And we also have 2 different meetings that we're now doing monthly or every other month. One is monthly, the other is every other month. And our authors are a part of that. It's open to other authors as well. If they can find out more by going to our No Bad Books Press Facebook page, they'll have the dates of when we do these meetings. We have a new author meeting, which is every other month. We actually just had one. And it's Teresa and me and anybody else who wants to join. And we are there to answer questions together. Sometimes we have the answer, sometimes we don't. Sometimes somebody else will. If we don't have the answer and we're not able to find it out collectively, we'll go find the answer. And we'll do our best to get it to those people who attended. We think that's a great learning experience for everybody, for us as well, because the industry is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. We're always learning new things. And what's really, well, the reason why that group started was because we've attended so many different writing group meetings where they're like, oh, I just got my 8th Hollywood deal. And it's like, that's nice. I'm still figuring out Facebook ads. Yeah. So, we're there for those people, the ones who are just getting started, even if they're several years into it, there's still so many questions out there. And so that's what that group's mission aims to do. And then our other one is our marketing meeting, which happens every month. And our No Bad Books Press authors are there, as well as our No Bad Books Press family, as we say. So those who aren't necessarily published with us, but who have just become a part of our group and of our network. And so we come together every month and we talk about everything from those Facebook ads, the dreaded Facebook ads, to Vella and how that's working and how we're marketing that. And if Canva is the latest, greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's just a really very supportive network that we have built and that we intend to continue. So even if people aren't within our speculative fiction genre or they don't intend to ever be published with us, our door is open to them.
Well, and you help them with media training as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, so that's something I've been doing for a little while. I help authors build their brand. And the first question I ask them goes back to, what are your goals? What are you trying to do with this? And then what is your ideal reader? Which is something I learned from Tamara Merrill and Jerry Stravey, 2 different authors in our San Diego community here. I took their marketing class and just absolutely loved it. It was such a good experience to attend that. So I help to build out a brand and to create a marketing box. And what I mean by that is, so your ideal audience is this. Great, cool. Where are they hanging out? Are they on Pinterest? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Twitter or Instagram? Where are their social media interests? Okay, cool. Now that we know where they are, we'll take these 2 platforms and we will target them there. So you don't have to worry about all these different ones. This is where your focus is going to be, because there's 7 major social media platforms right now. it's tough to manage too, let alone all seven. So when we're just getting started, to really build a foundation of following within those two, or however many, one or two, and then go from there. So within our box, we come up with, all right, what are my 10 favorite things? Okay, do those align with the goals and values with these readers? How does this relate back to my books and my genre? So we have all these different pieces that we're able to take to narrow down fields of the things I'll absolutely post about, things I will absolutely not post about. So it becomes easier to generate content and copy for our marketing purposes. And that goes through podcast interviews as well. Are you an expert on herbology? You know, whatever it is, how does that relate back to your story? Okay, cool. Here's how we find the podcast about that.
No, I want to interrupt you there. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to, because it's such a, God, that is such a valuable point to be made, because I know a lot of writers are very intimidated by social media, and they probably should be if you just look at Twitter, because it's like the world's largest cesspool, and I can see where it just scares people and they say, I don't want to be part of it. You can say the same thing probably about Facebook or anything else, but so I can see why they don't want to be part of that. But I also, the other side of that, when I see authors, when the only thing that they participate in on any of those formats is urging you to buy their book. And so after a while, it just becomes white noise. And I scroll past that as much as I scroll past, you know, all the shouting and screaming at each other from the two sides about whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you emphasize that point. You can be on social media, you can build a brand, you can build an audience, you can do all kinds of things, and not once ever talk about your book. Right. And you will probably sell more books that way than you will if you just keep saying, please buy my book, please buy my book.
Absolutely.
It sounds like that's what you emphasize to some extent with folks. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the 80-20 or even 90-10 split of 80% other content, 10% or 20%. I'm not good at math. I'm a writer. Buy my book. And it should be very, very minimal buy my book. Now, to that point, though, you can talk about your characters. Oh, my character Owen had discovered whatever today in my writing. I wrote 10,000 words this past weekend. Good for you if you do. But, you know, you can talk about your writing, absolutely talk about the story. But when it comes down to that actual buy my book, keep it to a minimum. Get people to invest in you first, because you are your name, you are your brand. Then talk about the story and get them invested in that. And then commingle those. And then that's when every Saturday, every Wednesday, buy my book.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm, you know, in my professional world, I am set upon often by the marketing department, and I have to tell them all the time, you know, I appreciate where you're coming from, but if you make people feel like they're being marketed to, no one wants to be marketed to. No one wants to be bapped on the nose all the time and told to do something. And they're far more inclined to do things when they feel it's something they want to do, as opposed to something they're being, you know, arm twisted to. So I think that's a great philosophy. I have a question I think is really, really maybe the most important thing I've asked you during this whole time here. You say you love sipping whiskey. What is your favorite whiskey? Because I also enjoy sipping whiskey. So please do share.
So speaking of my author branding, whiskey has kind of become a part of that. Not something I ever intended to do, but I love whiskey. I think it's fantastic. And I'm not talking, you know, your general well whiskey by any stretch of the imagination. But I have developed a taste for smokier whiskeys, and I actually have a list because I couldn't pick just one. So one of my favorites, which I just found out they're not sending beyond Utah anymore, and yes, Utah, is the High West Campfire, which is a blend of bourbon, rye, and Scotch. So it's sweet, but it's also has this beautiful smoky edge to it. And it's not over the top. It's not too peaty or anything like that. It's just got this nice balance of it's like a liquid campfire, but in a very pleasant sense. Like it's just a really nice. well-balanced drink there. And it's good neat or over ice or on the rocks. It's just perfect. It's just really great whiskey. Brothers Bond, which I was introduced to through Dennis K. Crosby and another author friend. It is so good. It's made by the actors from the Vampire Diaries of all things.
Okay.
So it's got a nice little literary twist to it. It's sweet, it's spicy, it's got a nice rounded body to it as well. I had a bottle and I went to go get another drink from it. And I was like, oh my God, it's empty. What did I do? Because it's just so smooth. I mean, it's just such a great sipper, stay at home kind of evening whiskey. But I love to drink that one while I'm writing or in the zone doing my basic developmental edits. It's just a really nice, I think of it as sort of my coffee table whiskey, if that makes any sense, just a nice, comfortable beverage. And then last but definitely not least, and it was really hard to choose among these three too. When we were in Ireland a couple weeks ago, I went up to, my friends had already checked out. They'd already had their bills set aside. It was our last pub we were going to be in Ireland before we had to leave the next morning. And I realized that aside from the Jameson tour, I hadn't really enjoyed whiskey while I was in Ireland. I mean, we had Irish coffees, we had many Irish coffees, but I didn't just have a whiskey, which is not me at all. So I went up to the bartender and I asked him, this is my last drink in Ireland. I like whiskey. Can I not leave your country without trying? And he took the reins of this very responsibly. And he looked through their whole selection. And then he pulled over Bushmills Black Bush Sherry Cask Reserve. We don't really have a lot of sherry here, so I'm not too familiar with it, aside from the Jameson sherry cask that I'd had. And I tell you, it was probably the best whiskey I've ever had.
Wow.
And I just drank it neat, and it was just, I don't know if it was the magic of Ireland that added to that, but it was so good.
Environment helps.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we were in a pub from the 1700s. I mean, come on, my goodness. But yeah, it was just a beautiful, beautiful, well-rounded chocolate notes, sort of like almost a chocolate cherry undertones too, like a dark chocolate cherry. Yeah. That probably came from the sweetness of the sherry. But yeah, 100%. If you ever see that, don't pass it.
I will. Now you have three goals. Three to search out and find and taste. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay. I like to end on what I hope is a fun question. I mean for it to be a fun question. And so the reason I keep it under wraps until the end is I really want your spontaneous reaction. So let us say I have the power to put you together with any one of the following three people. You can have a nice whiskey neat with any one of these three people and talk about writing all night long or whatever you want to talk about. It's up to you. Who would you choose and why? And the three people I will offer you are Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, or Mary Shelley.
Oh.
One of the three. I love that you didn't answer right away. It's meant to be hard.
It is hard. So I just...
Fun but difficult.
It's good. You did good. So I just listened to this incredible podcast about Mary Shelley, about her life and what it was like. And she was a hippie in her day. I mean, it was really interesting to hear how offbeat she was at the time. I mean, it was amazing. It was fascinating life. And then Stephen King, though, is Stephen King. I know, pizza and whiskey, talk about all this amazing storytellers. I mean, I have On Writing on my shelf right now. My 10th grade English teacher gave that to me and I've never let it go because it's so precious to me. I don't know that I can choose. Lovecraft would also be very interesting, but I'd probably want to talk to Mary Shelley because she has been such a major influence on my writing. When I read the her Frankenstein, The Modern Prometheus, I fell in love with her Gothic style and really do try to emulate that, which we'll see more and more with my older books. By older, mean the ones that I haven't produced and published yet, but her very floral, elegant writing is something that has continued to inspire me for years and years. So I'd have to say I'd curl up beside a fire with whiskey in hand with Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much for that too. So the last thing I'm just going to tell everybody once again, first of all, I want to thank Sarah Faxon for coming on and talking to us today, sharing all these insights. I urge you, if you are in that space, please check out No Bad Books Press. She and Teresa Halverson, her business partner, are great folks, accomplished authors themselves. They certainly know how to help you. So give them a look, see if you need to, and you can find them online. Just No Bad Books Press is easy enough to find. I urge you to check out Sarah's work and Teresa's work too. They're both excellent writers. I'm really enjoying Origins right now. It's a really good book. And I will say too, if you've gleaned anything out of this, whether you're on YouTube or on the podcast, please hit subscribe. And if you have a few minutes to leave a review, that'd be great. This is how people find us. And like I say, a lot of really smart people come on this show all the time and share all their insights into writing and publishing. I think it's worth it, but hey, up to you. So there you go. Sarah, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you coming on today. It's been a lot of fun. I wish you great success with the book and with all the work you do with authors. And before I give the final salute and sign off, I'll just say the same thing I always say. You know, tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so make today count. For Rich Eisen and the Open Mic and Sarah Faxon and No Bad Books Press, we'll see you next week.